Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. I've had a very productive and enjoyable reading week. Instead of talking about the books in the order I read them, as I usually do, this week I'm going to talk about them starting with the novels, and then the short story collection, and ending with the poetry. So I'm going to start with The Door by Magda Szabo, translated from the Hungarian by Len Rix. The Door is about the relationship between two women over the course of 20 years in a neighborhood of Budapest. The narrator is an author who finds herself at the beginning of the novel alongside her husband out of favor with the Hungarian government. However, later in the novel, she and her husband are rehabilitated for the most part. However, as a working author, the narrator needs someone to help clean the house, cook meals, do the shopping, the laundry, that sort of thing. And she is recommended to Emmerance, an elderly woman who lives on the street, who is a Jean of all trades, who cares for a number of houses in the neighborhood. And Emmerance is a character. She is just short of mythological. And one of the things about her is that she does not apply for a job. Potential employers apply to her. And that's the way she likes it. Emmerance is a fixture of the neighborhood. She is set in her ways. And over the course of 20 years, at the end of the mid and late 20th century, the narrator and Emmerance become close. There's a friendship that builds between the two. Colored, of course, by the occasional spat, because Emmerance does not necessarily always take things the way one would think one would take things. But The Door was an amazing novel. I really enjoyed seeing Emmerance's character and history slowly unfold over the course of the novel, and the narrator's fascination and discovery was really, really good. I really enjoyed the novel, which is the group read for Women in Translation Month, I might add. Next up is People with No Charisma by Jente Posthuma, translated from the Dutch by Sarah Timmer Harvey. People with No Charisma is Jente Posthuma's debut novel. It is set sometime in the later 20th century and into the early 21st century. It's about the narrator who lost her mother when she was 9. And her mother, who was an aspiring actress who gave up her career to care for her daughter, had ambitions for her daughter, which her daughter never quite fulfills over the course of the 30 years after her mother's death that are covered in People with No Charisma. So the novel follows, in a not so linear fashion, the narrator's life from shortly before her mother becomes sick with cancer to her wedding to her longtime partner when she's in her late 30s or very early 40s. And so it looks at the narrator during her school years, her year in Paris, going to university, her friendship with a special effects guy, her relationship with Arthur, who is, at least at one point, in the video game industry. So it's just generally her life and how her life develops and how that sort of looks back at her relationship with her mother. So People with No Charisma was enjoyable and a very quick read. If I had wanted to, I could have read it in probably less than 4 hours. This novel went very, very quickly. And it is enjoyable. So next on the docket is On Earth as It Is Beneath by Maia, translated from the Portuguese by Padma Viswanathan. So this is a slim novel that looks at an experimental prison colony that was built over a plantation where the slave owners visited horrors on their slaves. And over the course of the novel, the warden of this prison colony begins to hunt his prisoners, just as the prison is being closed. And perhaps there's something going on outside the prison walls, although that could also just be manufactured by the warden because he has a vested interest in keeping everybody else out, in addition to weeding through his prisoners. So the novel follows a number of surviving prisoners, mainly Bronco Gill, who are trying to survive and find a way out. And everyone is expecting a official with, I guess, whatever department of the Brazilian government that deals with prisons to come and finally shut this place down. And it's a fight for survival. So On Earth It Is Beneath was really enjoyable. And Maia really captures the sense of dread and anxiety and fear that such a situation would bring for its prisoners and the official and one of the remaining guards who also is a victim of the warden. So really, really good. It was shortlisted for this year's International Booker Prize. So on to the short story collections. So in addition to Women in Translation Month, August also has a few other events, one of which is Short Story Summer, or Summer of Short Stories. And so my idea was to combine Women in Translation Month with Short Story Summer. And so I'm reading a few short story collections by Women in Translation. And this week I read 7 Empty Houses by Samanta Schweblin, translated from the Spanish by McDowell. So these stories are mostly focused on familial relationships, the relationships of husband and wife, of parents and children, adult children and their parents, and they're fascinating. It did take me a little bit to get into these stories, and I read one story a day. And I will talk a little bit about how I read everything I read this week shortly before I get to next week's reading plan. So let's do a quick rundown of the story. So none of that was okay. I'm not entirely sure what I make of my parents and my children. Outside of the fact that I think the main character is an idiot. It happens all the time in this house. That was pretty good. Breath from the Depths was phenomenal. I really liked that one. 2 Square Feet was pretty good as well. An Unlucky Man I thought was really good. And Out was okay. So, yeah. On the whole, I did enjoy 7 Empty Houses, and I would like to read more of Schweblin's work. So, on to the poetry. First up is Eventide Bleeds, selected poems by Jeannette L. Clariond, translated from the Spanish by Forrest Gander. So Clariond is a Mexican poet. Both poets I read this week are from Mexico. So I rather enjoyed this collection. There were some really good poems in here. So this is from the Princeton University Press's Lockhart Library of Poetry and Translations. So what they do is on the even-numbered pages is the Spanish original, and on the odd-numbered pages is the English translation. So I'll be definitely reading some of her work later this month for Poetry Thursday. They were pretty good. And finally, I read Stolen Flower by Irma Pineda, translated from the Dejaza in Spanish by Wendy Call. So, Stolen Flower is a linked collection or one single poem that explores the epidemic of femicide in Mexico that has been going on for several decades now. The impetus for this poem was the rape and murder of Ernestina Asensio Rosario by Mexican soldiers. And this event brought for Pineda events that happened in her youth and young adulthood, where the Mexican army was sent in to let me see if it's in here. To impose the national government's authority on small cities, election of a mayor not from the ruling party, and there is I am blinking on it. There was in the 90s a rebellion in Chiapas. There is a rebellion in Chiapas that also featured much brutality, and this collection explores that, and it is amazing, just heart-wrenching. So that's what I read, and in this collection's case, the English translation is on the even numbered pages, and the Dijaza and Spanish originals are on the odd numbered pages, although that does sometimes change, and there are also photographs, in the book as well. So amazing. Okay, so what will I be reading this coming reading week? Well, I don't know if I'm going to quite do what I did this coming reading week. Because one of the things about Short Story Summer is the idea of reading a short story a day, which I did do this reading week. So on Saturday, I started with the first story in 7 Empty Houses. And then I started on The Door by Magda Szabo, which I then finished on early Sunday afternoon. At which point I then read the second story from 7 Empty Houses, and Eventide Bleeds. So on Monday, I read the third story from 7 Empty Houses, and then in the afternoon read On Earth That It Is Beneath. Tuesday, I then read the fourth story from this collection, and Stolen Flower. And then on Wednesday, the fifth story from this collection, and then I started on People with No Charisma, which I could have read all on Wednesday, because I stopped reading. I had about 32 pages left of this novel. I mean, this novel, you can read it. It is fast-paced, just amazingly fast-paced. And then I finished People with No Charisma on Thursday morning. And then I read a story Thursday afternoon and completed this short story collection earlier this morning. So that's this reading week. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that this coming reading week, because many of the books are longer than the others, so it will take me several days to read, more than likely. And also the poetry short story collection has more stories in it, and is also longerish. So for this coming reading week, I'm planning to read Intruder in the Dust by William Faulkner, which is this year's selection for Faulkner in August. I also would like to finish my business with Kairos by Jeannette Erpenbeck, translated from the German by Michael Hoffmann. I would like to get to She Who Remains by Rene Karabash, translated from the Bulgarian by Izidora Angel. And for the next batch of short stories, I will be reading Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, translated from the Korean by Anton. Now, there are 9 stories in Cursed Bunny, so I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work. Because if I do a short story a day, well, I'll be starting Intruder in the Dust this afternoon, shortly after I finish this video. And then I'll work on it into Saturday. I don't know exactly when I will finish it on Saturday, though. So I don't know necessarily if I'll then be able to read the first story from here. And then read something in between, like for Kairos. So I think what I might do is this week go ahead and just read Curse Bunny effectively in one go, rather than breaking it up between different other things I'm reading. I'll just read the whole thing. And yeah, just go with that. So that is my reading plan for next week. I probably won't have a video up this coming Monday or the following Monday. My mom has doctor's appointments those 2 Mondays. So I will for sure be back this Tuesday with probably book tag. So any booktube. Until then, thank you and have a great weekend.